Again. For us to get ourselves to know each other a little better, just use the chat box for me if you're happy to. Just let us know where you're signing in from, and in terms of where in the world, but sort of more importantly, what your area of interest comes in from. I've said I'm going to share like my 3 best tips, which for breathing. It can span quite a number of many things. So use the chat box. Are you interested? Where are you coming from? Not just where in the world, but where are you coming from at this in regards to like, I'm interested in breathing for my exercise performance or my sleep or my recovery or staying healthy in retirement. Thank you, Elizabeth. Just gives me some context as to know like who I'm talking to and what you're most interested in. Is that okay? John, physiotherapist from Glasgow, own use and with patient. Okay, so there's a lot that I do with like a lot of athletes where the effects that breathing can have on mobilizing the diaphragm, the rib cage, and then all the associated tissues around that, and how the body tends to organize itself around the rib cage. I do a whole course on that, but typically with the athletes that I work with, like the physiotherapists that are part of their support teams, they really like those bits. Another master instructor, Tessie from Belgium. Staying healthy, to feel better, perform better. There we go. There's my learn from the best. Hey, did anyone not recognise me because I've had my hair shaved off? I need to update my pictures. There's a picture of me there with a terrible. Why didn't someone tell me? Look how bad my hair looks there. Why did nobody tell me that? I mean, my wife had said it every day for the last 5 years. Tools and working pains. Buy some breathing whilst running. Okay, cool. A few of you showing there. Nice. All right. Poor sleep. So, and okay, some bit of sleep apnea sometimes. Okay. So we're welcome. My 3 best tips.
Yeah, can do, mate. Yeah.
Difficult. Oh. I'll just try and make sure everyone's on mute. I'll leave some time at the end for questions, but just for the quality of the recording, because some people won't be able to join live, I've just muted everyone. I hope that's okay. So, welcome. 3 best tips. I mean, I could probably do this webinar a number of different times, and depending on the context of what we're talking about or where we're trying to apply it, I might have 3 best tips that are slightly different. They're going to be different in slightly different contexts. What I've chosen for today, partly because of the running, the 11 marathons I did in 6 days 2 weeks ago. As you're running for a long time and really focusing on your breathing, there was a lot within that I was reflecting on and contemplating. And some of that has been born out of into this. But that's not to say that this is purely about exercise performance, not at all. And that will uncover itself as I go through. I've done quite a few of these webinars in the past, and I'm conscious also that like there's so much context to breathing that rather than just delivering the same webinar that I've done before, I want to share something different and something a bit new, and also the way I've been seeing and perceiving things and learning changes over time as well. So this is what I've got for you today. So our 3 best tips. Very briefly, I was going to just say like, this is me, that's me back when I played rugby. That's actually the last professional game, just by chance. That photo is from the last professional game of rugby that I played back in 2013. And I had a series of brain injuries, and the one that ended my career after this game was in training, and I had a seizure on the field and a small bleed on the brain, and it changed the course of my life. And one of those directions it took me in was looking at brain health and how breathing has been a very, very important part of restoring oxygen and blood supply to the brain for healing, but also for regulating the nervous system, because you're going to have a dysregulated nervous system after a brain injury like I'd had. So that's sort of what led me down into this side of work. I'd been working as before I got fully into like all of the breath coaching over the last 5 or 6 years, I was working as a strength and conditioning coach, working with athletes in a very traditional strength and conditioning sort of environment, working in the gym, making them stronger, all that type of stuff. And as this little Pandora's box, let's call it, of breathing started to like just have a little look inside of it, for my own brain health, I started to just see, wow, there's this whole system within the body that, and when I say we, just those of us that were training traditionally had never really considered training. And so I started going down that rabbit hole, and I continue to go down that rabbit hole today. So that's just very briefly on where it's come to from me. And the regulation of the nervous system is going to be relevant for the second tip of these three in this. So we've got three biggest things. The biggest and number one domino of everything, whether you're looking at breathing from an efficiency point of view, whether you're looking at breathing from a regulated nervous system point of view, whether you're looking at breathing from I want to push my physical capabilities in exercise or in running or whatever the sporting context is, or if it's in relation to being able to manage my sort of levels, my stress response, or manage my anxiety, or any of the sort of emotional, psychological components that we may and all at times feel under, is our breathing rate. So I'll say that again. There is, in my humble opinion now, from having looking at this for a lot of, if I have to pin it down to one thing, it is your breathing rate. That is the key domino that affects and knocks over everything else. And there's a little chain thing here because it's linked to everything. And it's going to be linked to our other 2 points. Yeah. So breathing rate, number one. An interesting one in relation to exercise, but I'm going to bring it into a little bit of everything. But in relation to exercise, number one, breathing rate. Breathing rate's been shown to be so important that researchers now are suggesting that our breathing rate is a better marker of our rate of perceived exertion, so our RPE, better than heart rate, and better than lactate levels. And I'll say that again, because when I came across this in research, I was like, well, breathing's better than measuring your breathing's better than measuring your blood lactate levels for understanding like your own perception of how you're breathing. So breathing rate, a better marker of the rate of perceived exertion than heart rate or blood lactate levels. And where this starts to become really interesting is going, okay, so let's look at this from both angles. If I'm breathing faster, my rate of perceived exertion, so how hard I think I'm working, is going to be higher. So the faster I'm breathing, the harder I feel I'm working. And we've probably all experienced that. Maybe use the chat box if you like. Have you experienced that sensation where it's like, I'm doing some sort of physical activity that my breathing rate is like so fast that I feel like I can't do any more. Like your perception of like what you're doing is like I've reached my max. Let us know in the comments in the chat box on that, because I think that's a really it's really nice to try to like contextualize these things to like stuff we've all probably experienced. Now, contrary or the opposite of that, then, we're using that to our advantage, is going, hold on a minute. So what this is also saying is if I can control my breathing rate better, if I can control my breathing rate better, I can actually reduce my perception of how hard I'm working. And there's this beautiful relationship between breathing and the physiological components of breathing and getting oxygen in and CO2 out and all of everything that's in between. But it also shows that relationship between our psychology and breathing, because it's perception of exertion. So if I can control my breathing rate, I can control my perception of how hard I'm working. Something I often say is, are you in control of your breathing, or is your breathing controlling you? Me being in control of my breathing means that I'm in control of my perception of how hard I'm working. If my breathing's controlling me, my breathing rate has gone beyond what I can manage, and that's sending a feedback loop to the brain of going, you're reaching your limit here. We either need to slow down or we need to stop. Yeah, and that is linked into, if I can get to my next slide, taking it outside or away from exercise performance. It's part of this feedback loop is our second most important thing, linked to that breathing rate. There's feedback loops to the brain and your autonomic nervous system in relation to how hard your body is breathing and how fast it is breathing. Our breathing rate is a reflection of our nervous system. If I'm breathing fast, it's sending a feedback loop to the brain of we're under some sort of stress or challenge. That could be a physical one like we just talked about in terms of exercise, but it also could be a mental, emotional, psychological one. And the faster I'm breathing, that feedback loop I'm sending the brain is like, this thing we're doing or trying to do or trying to overcome is really hard. And the faster that goes, it's creating a message of, it might be too hard for this. I'm now describing or articulating what I think my brain is saying to me, but that notion of like, this is probably too hard for you, Jacko, potentially. The autonomic nervous system, so your stress, you're going to be more up-regulated, your heart rate is going to be higher the faster you're breathing. And there's other feedback loops that play into this as well, in that the faster I'm breathing, my breath is going to be shallower, i.e. going to be into the upper chest, because the distance from your airway, I'll show this, your airway, whether it's coming in through your nose or in through your mouth, it's getting to your airway here. Yeah, the distance from your airway to your upper chest is much shorter, and down to your diaphragm, the bottom of your lungs, is almost double the distance. That additional distance to breathe deeper is going to take more time. And if you're breathing fast, you don't have the time for it to be deep, and therefore it's going to be shallow. And when you're breathing shallowly, you're using accessory breathing muscles attached to the top of the rib cage, and the activation of those muscles send a feedback loop to the brain of like, the thing you're doing is hard and you might not be able to do it, we should probably stop. Does that make sense? So there's a whole host of these feedback loops feeding back into the brain and the nervous system being very acutely aware of like how your breathing is telling you about your external and internal environment and whether we're safe or not. And the faster we're breathing, the more that feedback loop is like, the thing you're doing is tough, whether it's a physical exercise or whether it's mental, cognitive, or psychological, emotional. Yeah? And it has a snowball effect. It's my nice little snowball. In that it can be positive or negative. If I can't control that breathing rate, it's going to send a feedback loop to the brain, saying that we're stressed, saying that we're challenged. What's that going to do to your breathing? Well, if you're feeling stressed and feeling like you're challenged, it's going to make you breathe even faster, and then we get this negative snowballing effect. But we could also have the opposite. I can take control of my breathing, which hopefully by the end of this webinar we'll feel like we have some tools to do. I'll control my breathing. I'm sending a more positive feedback loop to the brain of like, this is okay. My perception of my exertion here is not as high. which leads me into like I do feel like I can potentially overcome this challenge, whether it's physical, mental, emotional. And that breathing rate is key to feeding that loop positively. One of the other things that the fast breathing rate is going to do is, in relation to that more upregulated state and that more sort of stress, fight or flight state, is the parts of your brain that like to stay focused, calm, concentrated and rational in thought, they tend to get shut off a little bit, or the opposite. When I can stay calmer with my breathing, I can stay calmer in the mind, and I can be more rational with my decision making, and it's easier for me to focus and concentrate on the challenge or task that is in front of me. So when I'm in control of my breathing rate and in control of my self-regulation and my stress response, I'm stacking all the cards in my favor, physiologically and psychologically, to be able to overcome the challenges that are in front of me, whether that's a physical like exercise workout, or whether it's more a cognitive or emotional or psychological challenge. That breathing rate is the key thing to set you up to be able to take on those things in the best, most regulated state. So regardless of that type of the type of challenge or stress, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional, your breathing rate is the number one thing, and that's where it links into those feedback loops. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. And then our third then tip. So one, they're all linked. One, breathing rate. Yeah. Two, the breathing rate affecting those feedback loops. And ultimately, you get to be in control of those with some practice. Yeah. Number three is essentially, how are you going to control that response? Okay. Two examples. The guy is running or pretending to run, posing in exercise. In order for you to be able to stay in control of your breathing rate, which is on the right here, you need to be able to increase your tidal volume, which is the fancy word for the size of your breath. If you can't increase the size of your breath as your exercise demand increases, in order to meet the ventilation requirements, so in order to get enough air in so you've got enough oxygen and you can clear enough CO2, instead, if you can't increase the size of your breath because your diaphragm, you can't activate it, your ribs are all tight and jacked up, then the only option you have is to increase the speed of your breathing, increase the rate. Does that make sense? There's only two things that modulate your breathing in terms of the volume of air that you can get in. You've got how many breaths you're taking in a minute, and then you've just got the size of each of those breaths. Yeah? If your rib cage is in a poor postural position, it's harder for you to activate your diaphragm, and it's harder for the diaphragm to move through its full range. That's going to limit your tidal volume. If you can't activate your diaphragm, that's going to limit your tidal volume. If you have the habit of breathing into your upper chest all the time and your accessory breathing muscles are like real strong and like, yeah, we'll do breathing for you, that's going to limit your tidal volume. If you can't control the speed of your breathing, that's also going to limit your tidal volume because it's going to have to stay short and shallow. And we know that short and shallow and panting is associated with feeling out of breath. Well, guess what? You feel out of breath because you're actually limiting the amount you're able to ventilate, and you're limiting the efficiency of how you're ventilating. And it's sending a feedback loop to your brain of like, we're not clearing enough CO2, we're not getting enough oxygen in, this is too stressful, we need to stop or slow down. Yeah. So I need to be able to increase my tidal volume. I need to be able to increase the size of my breath in order that the speed of them can be more controlled. If I can, these green lines, increase the size of my breaths to allow me for the rates to be more controlled or slightly slower than it would be otherwise, like relatively, not necessarily that breathing is slow during high intensity exercise, but just relative, then I reduce the sensations of air hunger. There's some really nice, I haven't put the reference in, there's some really nice research on this, where if I can activate the mechanoreceptors, that are all of those receptors that are around my diaphragm rib cage, if I can activate those, I change the sensations and perception of how out of breath or air hunger that I'm feeling. And what it ultimately allows me to do is come back to point number one. I'm able to control my breathing rate. I have to be able to increase my tidal volume. One of the big things about that is, can you activate your diaphragm? I was just quickly checking that I spelled diaphragm right. There's a good question for you. Can you activate, we're going to do a little practice now, of like, can you activate your diaphragm? Here's a question for you. And you can answer that yes or no. Does the diaphragm contract? It's a 50-50, so you can have a guess in the chat box, like, don't matter. You can guess twice, so you're definitely going to get it right on one of them. Does your diaphragm contract on an inhale or an exhale? Chat box, go. You're allowed to guess twice, so everyone can have a go, because you can't get wrong. So, and I'm sure we're going to, so you can't say yes, because the answer was inhale or exhale. So the answer, Elizabeth, can't be yes, because you've got to choose one. And we've got exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, inhale, exhale, exhale. At the moment, we're 50-50, and then we've got an inhale. Any more? Then we've got an exhale. This is brilliant, I love this game. Any more? So half of you are wrong and half of you are right. Interesting, we've literally, I think it's as close to bang on, apart from Elizabeth that said yes. Oh no, sorry, Elizabeth, you were answering yes to you can activate your diaphragm. Okay, good. Glad you can. Apologies, I was Mickey taking when I was the one being an idiot. Okay, so which one is it? It's definitely one of them. Okay, we're going to do two things. I'm now ad hoc coaching you because I didn't know what you were going to say. I should have guessed. Right, you don't have to show me your stomach, but I'm just going to do this for the purpose of this so you can see. Look, I'm going to use my mouth so I can do a strong exhale. I want you to put your hands on your stomach and you're going to do a strong exhale and see how much that engages your stomach muscles, your abdominals, particularly your six-pack, your rec abs, your obliques. You'll feel your ribs coming down and in. Have you noticed that? You can, if your screen's on, you can like nod at me or give me a thumbs up, or if you're chat boxing, you can write in chat with it. You should feel engagement of that. Now, are those muscles, are they on the outside of me? Are they superficial? Are they outside? My rec abs, are they on the outside or are they deep tissue? It's not a trick question. I'm showing you them. You can see them. They must be on the outside. You can see them. Yeah? Are those muscles your diaphragm? Or is your diaphragm deeper? Yeah? Pamela is on board with me here now. She's nodding. So your diaphragm, Tessie, your diaphragm is deeper. I can't touch my diaphragm. I can try to get into some connective tissue at the bottom of my ribs where it connects onto your ribs. But it'd be like, most people are sometimes too young for this. But what's it called? Enter the Dragon? A famous Bruce Lee film where he like goes like, sticks his hand, like punches someone in the stomach, like rips, like gets to their like spine. Anyway, it's a bit gruesome. But essentially your diaphragm attaches onto your spine. It's very deep. So a lot of the time people know that my diaphragm's around here somewhere. And then when you do a strong exhale, you feel that, you're like, oh yeah, I can feel that. And then we go, that must be the diaphragm. But that's the exact opposite of your diaphragm contracting. So anyone that said your diaphragm contracts on an inhale Give yourself a pat on the back. You won. The diaphragm contracts on an inhale. The diaphragm is situated, connects onto your lowest 2 ribs. So if I show you here, look, there's my lowest 2 ribs. And they make an angle with your sternum, your breastplate, called the infrasternal angle. It's about 45 degrees on each one, roughly. Everyone's a little bit different, but roughly. Yeah? So I've got like a 90-degree angle between these two. It's a bit of a dome shape, but it's not just at the front of me, it's all around me. Yeah? It contracts on an inhale. It's supposed to move down and flatten out as it contracts. And the ribs, these ribs, should go, if I breathe in, push my hands apart. The ribs widen to facilitate the movement of the diaphragm down and flattening out. You then feel this area expanding and getting bigger as you increase the pressure inside of you with air coming in. Okay, so how do you contract the diaphragm or make it feel a contraction? Has anyone ever injured a muscle, injured their shoulder or their knee or something, and you go to see a physio and they give you like some simple little exercises to help activate the muscle? Typically, it would be an isometric contraction. So if it was a shoulder thing, you might like push against the wall. So you're pushing, but you're pushing against an object that can't move. So the muscle is not moving. It's just trying to recruit it. Does that make sense? Isometry means there's like no movement. Yeah? I mean, you wouldn't do it like that, just leaning against the wall. So, how do I recruit my diaphragm without letting it move to help us with this activation? I hold my breath. So, I find my 2 lower ribs. You can do this on yourself now. You're going to find those 2 lower ribs. Your central tendon is just between the 2 of them, but deep inside, not on the outside. Yeah? You're going to take a breath in and out. You're going to pinch your nose, and I'll show you. Look. I pinch my nose, and then I try to breathe in. Watch what happens here. Watch what happens. When I tried to breathe in, my diaphragm wanted to move down and flatten out. I was activating it, but it couldn't move, so it like pulsed. And you saw like a... It's not your abs, it's deeper than that. Can you feel that? Have a go. You're not going to try and hold your breath for 20 seconds, you just hold your breath for a couple of seconds whilst you try to breathe in. If your body and brain is very connected to your accessory breathing muscles, you're going to feel it like here. You're going to go. You need to relax here, and the intention needs to come from down here. If you're struggling and it all feels quite high up here, 1, shake and relax your shoulders out, and then 2, rub those lower ribs where your diaphragm is attached to. Send some sensory input into where those lower ribs are. And then have your fingers just in between those 2 lower ribs to go, this is where it's going to happen. I've relaxed my shoulders, chest, breathe in, breathe out, hold my nose, try to breathe in. And whilst I'm trying to breathe in, I feel a contraction here. As soon as I stop trying to breathe in, it relaxes. That's your brain sending some neurons down your phrenic nerve to your diaphragm consciously so you can activate it. We want our diaphragm to be facilitating our breathing when we're not thinking about it. But the nice thing about the diaphragm is we can have conscious control of it, or we can let it happen automatically. We improve the auto by doing a little bit of work consciously with it. And then we change the auto. And rather than the auto coming from more up here, it comes from more down there. But here, distance from your airway, whether you use nose or mouth, distance from airway to here is much shorter than from to down here. So we have to be able to control that, number 1, our breathing rate, in order that it's slow enough that we can breathe effectively with the diaphragm. That helpful? Make sense? If you I've got a couple of free courses, and normally sometimes it might take a bit more practice for someone to be able to feel the diaphragm contracting effectively. But it's not something that's you don't need a 3-month program to do it. It's normally like, okay, within the first session, or a little bit more practice later today, you might get it. Or maybe you use my free course and tomorrow you get it. Yeah, something like that. It's not difficult. Yeah, but if it's not abnormal, if you're feeling a bit like, no, I don't feel like I'm getting it, it still feels all quite high, that's also normal. Yeah, so don't worry. You will get there with a little bit of practice, and it won't take long. Cool. Now, that was in like a sporting. So let me just come back to it. So, can you activate your diaphragm? Yes, we just tried to. Some of us will feel like better at it than others, but a little bit of practicing get better. Once you can activate your diaphragm, you're then trying to use your diaphragm to fill the lungs from the bottom up, which is going to help you increase your tidal volume, which is going to help you to control the rate of your breathing during exercise. So you feel more in control, your perception of effort is reduced, your stress response is lower, and you're going to feel less air hunger. There's other things that are going to dictate whether you can increase your tidal volume or not, but being able to activate the diaphragm is a key one of those. Your tolerance to CO2, your psychological relationship with air hunger, those mechanoreceptors around your ribcage and diaphragm. So if your ribcage is very tight and restricted, if I'm very tense, all those, and if my sort of day-to-day breathing habits are quite like shallow upper chest, all those things are going to play into whether you can increase your tidal volume effectively or not. And the demand of the exercise that you're doing will also affect that. And then you can even throw in there like your own fitness and level of conditioning. The better conditioned I am and the fitter I am, the easier it's going to be for me to manage some of that airflow. And then I guess, and the other one would be then my actual airway, whether I'm using my nose or my mouth, what's going on with my actual airway in terms of how much space I've got back here. So my jaw position is going to affect that. My neck position is going to affect that. And when for bits of work that I'm doing specifically nasally, in and out, my tongue, the strength of my tongue, the tightness of my tongue are going to play into the tissues that actually support the jaw and create your airway. So all of those things are going to go into it, not just whether you can activate your diaphragm or not. But hopefully you can appreciate that activating the diaphragm is like a key starting point for you to be able to increase the size of your breath in an efficient way, which is filling from the bottom up. You want to fill from the bottom up, one, because that's where the diaphragm is, but two, you've got more lung down there because of the shape of the lung. You've got more blood at the bottom of the lungs due to gravity, and you've got a greater density of alveoli, they're little air sacs, where the exchange of oxygen in and CO2 out from your lungs into your blood occurs. So it's very efficient to breathe low down, fill from the bottom up, rather than to breathe shallowly. Not only is that sending that feedback loop, but you're literally just less efficient at breathing, less efficient at gas exchange higher up in the lungs. Yeah? So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and I tried to give you just there as much context as possible. So it was like I threw a lot of stuff at you there, but I want you to. It's unfair sometimes to like not give you the full picture and just go, just increase your tidal volume just by activating your diaphragm. Do that through your nose, and that will sort all of your problems out. Because there's more stuff that goes into it, and when we sort of reduce it down too much and we lose some detail, we don't do something justice. And breathing is simple, but there's little bits of detail that can make a big difference. Yeah. Okay. And then let's go away from exercise and let's come to more like a mental, emotional, psychological thing. If I am feeling overwhelmed, just slowing my breathing down might not be helpful, in that I'm not in a psychological place to be able to deal with the sensations that a slower breathing rate is going to create. But I do want to try to reduce my breathing rate, because when I reduce my breathing rate, I send good positive feedback loops to the brain of like, I am safe, I'm okay, I can deal with this current challenge that's in front of me. Which sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, because you just said you can't do it slowly, but you do want to bring down your breathing rate. Because that breathing down that breathing rate is going to send that positive feedback loop to the brain, and that's where pauses can come in really effectively. Yeah. So I might feel uncomfortable trying to slow my breathing down, but I might be able to pause. And one of the pauses that we like to do, great exercise that Patrick from the Oxford Vantage has taught us, and that I love teaching, where we do short pauses at the end of an exhale every few breaths. And the reason we do the pause at the end of the exhale rather than at the end of the inhale is the relationship that breathing has with that autonomic nervous system in real time. In that, I might come out of the chair for this. Difficult to say this without sounding like you're singing, so I tend to sing it. You ready? I'm terrible at singing. Every breath you take, every breath that you take, on the inhale, your heart rate speeds up. It's up-regulating. It's increasing sympathetic activation, so like your fight or flight. But every exhale you take, your heart rate slows down. It's down-regulating. It's calming. It's more parasympathetic, promoting our rest-digest response. So that's happening with every breath. The inhale, we're coming up. The exhale, we're coming down. Inhale, we're going up. Exhale, we're coming down. It's happening with every breath that we take. If I want to create a sense of calm, it's ideally I want to slow down my whole breathing rate. But if I'm feeling particularly anxious or stressed, that can be a challenge. So I can slow my breathing rate down by just pausing at certain points in my breathing cycle. It makes sense to put that pause in on the half of the breathing cycle where the system is calming itself, where heart rate is lowering and parasympathetic tone is increasing. So we do our pauses at the end of the exhale for that reason. I typically teach that exercise by guiding just take 2 calm nasal breaths in and out through the nose and pause at the end of the second exhalation. Well, let's just do like a couple of rounds of it now. Yeah. So you don't have to change or do anything magical with your posture or anything at all. All I would encourage you to do is put your tongue at the roof of the mouth, and rather than breathing up your nose, which tends to activate your upper chest, I want you to breathe backwards. So breathe back, your airway goes. I'm not going to shove something in my nose. Some of you have seen that before. Air goes back. It doesn't go up. So breathe backwards with your tongue up. And then to ensure it's like calm, try to breathe quietly. So listen to your breath and try to breathe quietly. So take a quiet breath in, relax on the way out. A second quiet breath in, relax on the way out. And then we'll pause for 2, 1. Quiet breath in, relax breath out. Quiet, calm breath in, relax breath out. And pause for 2, 1. Calm, quiet breath in, relaxing out. Calm, quiet breath in, relaxing out. And pause for 2, 1. Carry that on in your own head. I've only done it 3 times here. Carry that on in your own head, but listen to what I'm explaining. You can do that with your eyes open. You don't have to pinch your nose when you do your pauses, so that I could be sat on the bus feeling a bit anxious about a meeting I'm going to, and I can do that exercise and no one would know I'm doing it. I could be in the meeting and feeling a little overwhelmed, and I could do that exercise and no one would know that I'm doing it. It's so simple to do, but very effective. If you carry on doing that for a few minutes, something that you might notice, you might feel a little calmer, you might be able to sense that. But a physical sensation you might notice more saliva building up in the mouth. And saliva building up in the mouth is a sign of your body shifting from a state of more fight or flight, sympathetic, into a more down-regulated, parasympathetic, rest digest. And the saliva is linked to that digestion piece. So that's a nice thing to notice. I feel more saliva in the mouth. Oh, I feel a little calmer. I feel a little more relaxed. Yeah. Yes. So, very simple, easy to do, but very effective. And something definitely to take away from this slide is that when you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed or anxious, anything like that, the pause, and it's the end of the exhale, the pause is easier to achieve to control your heart rate back down. It will be heart rate as well. Control your breathing rate rather than just trying to slow your breathing rate down. Yeah. This was a picture of me realizing how bad my hair was, and I'm struggling there. Why didn't anyone tell me? So that breathing rate, whether we're talking about, is our number one pillar, our number one domino, knocks everything else over. Whether it's for physical exercise or whether it's for physical, mental, emotional challenges in life, our breathing rate is a very good reflection of the nervous system. Yeah, I mentioned about my brain injury and having to work on regulating my nervous system. It had become dysregulated from physical trauma to the brain and those respiratory centers being affected. Being able to work on my breathing to regulate the nervous system was a key element to that recovery for me. You don't have to have had a traumatic brain injury to be experiencing quite high levels of stress in our life, and your breathing rate will reflect what that stress is. So as well as your breathing rate being a tool to control your responses to stress and challenges, it's also a great little window into your nervous system. You can check in on and just sit for 30 seconds and count your breathing and get an idea of like, how fast am I breathing currently? Is that giving me a little bit of a insight into my internal state and a bit better interoception or awareness of like, not just what I'm thinking, but how is my body responding to the environment that I'm currently in, whether that's a physical environment or the mental environment that you're in, or a combination of both. Yeah. So there was already someone that asked a question about the courses. Yes, I will just explain those in a second. I hope you found that helpful. I'm going to leave some time for questions. I'm happy to answer any question that you got. And if I don't know the answer, I will tell you, and then I'll try and find out and get back to you. As in, I'll tell you I don't know, and I'll get back to you later. Has that been helpful? Please use the chat box, and if you have any questions, start putting them in there. Would you be interested, or would you like to learn more? Would you like to understand a deeper level? I think is always an interesting question. And then there's also a question of, would you like to teach or potentially coach others? I asked those questions because two things. One being, I mentioned those free courses. So there's two free courses. One, the foundations of breathing, which is not specifically, there's a little bit on exercise, a little bit on sleep, but it's general, it's foundational. That's free. It's at ProBreathwork.com. I'll email you after this with links to it, so it's nice and easy to find. But if you go to ProBreathwork.com, you're going to find it there. It is also an app, so you can look at it on your computer, or Pro Breathwork app is available on Apple and Android, both on Apple and Android. There's the Foundations course, that's free. And then there's also one that's specific to breathing related to managing stress and anxiety, which is also free. And they're full courses, full access, free, lifetime access, whether it's on your computer or on the app. If you're interested in the coaching side of it, wanting to go a little bit deeper with your understanding, my last so as a master instructor with the Oxygen Advantage, I have taught over probably about 150 coaches now, something like that. And the last certification training that I'm doing this year is coming up next month, 17th, 18th, 19th of October in beautiful Snowdonia, here, just down the road, at Triganos Retreat Centre. There is currently an early bird offer where you save £100. But as a thank you for coming to the webinar, if you are interested in that, you're going to get an extra £100 off the early bird price. The early bird ends at the end of September. The code webinar100 gets you another £100 off the early birds. You're going to save £200 if you are interested in that. And I'm happy to answer any questions on any of those things or anything that we discussed or anything else maybe that we didn't get to cover today that you were hoping we're going to, or anything else. I'll just check in the chat box if any questions have been already. Details about the course done, but I'll email you the links. We wrap a band around ribs area, it helps. So you putting something around the ribs to give some sensory feedback. It could be as simple as just putting your own hands around your ribs and making yourself, as you inhale, feel those ribs moving out. And then importantly, because a lot of people miss this, on the exhale, them coming back in together. A lot of the athletes I work with tend to be quite good at expanding and extending and opening up, but getting the ribs to come back down and in, we can sometimes lack that quality, and that can cause some stiffness and tightness around the diaphragm, around the ribs, but it can also play upstream into the shoulder, it can also play into the spine, because your ribs attach into the spine, and it can also play into the pelvis, because your pelvis sits just below that rib cage, and there's a relationship between your rib cage, a very distinct relationship between your rib cage and your pelvis. Who is your barber? No, I'm joking, no one else. Gans was also working with asthmatics, those who are steroid inhaler dependent. John, great question. I've worked with a few people as well as athletes, particularly that have like exercise-induced asthma. We get some really good improvements in symptoms. I have had clients that over X number of weeks or months, not on purpose, they just stop using their inhaler in that they just don't feel like they need to. I don't tell them to stop using it, they just naturally stop using it. When they're, particularly the nasal breathing is really important for that because of the protection that the nose provides for your airway and for your lungs. So definitely some work on nasal breathing for people suffering with asthma for sure, but always follow your medical advice, but you should definitely work on your breathing. I had a really good one from an athlete who he's got asthma, and he has a test every season, at the start of every rugby season. I'd have to get it up, I can't remember. But he said, he was weird, I've been working with him for about 18 months and he never really said much about it. He was like, oh, I thought you might like this. I just increased his whatever testing they did with him. It increased by whatever percent. And they were so impressed. They were like, what have you been doing? And he's like, oh, all this breathing stuff. And they were like, the testers were pleasantly surprised, let's say, that practicing breathing work. He'd done a lot of work on breath holding, a lot of work on respiratory muscle strength training, a lot of work on CO2 tolerance work. And it was, coming out on a traditional sort of asthmatic test. Because when running today, I took 5 strides on breathing in, 4 strides out, felt like I was suffocating a little. Definitely would like to know more. If you slow down your breathing too much and you're not increasing your tidal volume, you're going to potentially, 2 things going on. You'll be retaining more CO2, carbon dioxide, than your brain is comfortable with at the moment. And that might send some alarm bells of suffocation off or air hunger. Yeah. The other thing could be, particularly with exercise like running, it's quite high, depending on how fast you're running, but it's quite energy consuming. If you're slowing your breathing down too much, a bit like Goldilocks, yeah, just right, with the porridge, not too hot. If you're slowing your breathing rate down too much and not able to increase your tidal volume proportionally, the total amount of air that you're breathing could be restricting your oxygenation of your blood and your muscles. But the suffocate, depending on so there's twofold. There's two things going on, and it's difficult. I mean, it'd be fair to say the suffocation type of feeling and air hunger feeling would be a significant portion of that would be related to the levels of CO2 that you're then retaining. But I've got a portable device that you strap to the leg, and it would be able to tell us what your muscle oxygenation levels were like to see whether actually are you ventilating adequately, or actually are you restricting yourself too much? Yeah. So one thing would be, so advice on it would be, you don't want to make yourself feel like you're suffocating. Yeah. It wants to feel comfortable. If you were saying 5 strides on the in and 4 on the out. One thing I would potentially try and do is swap them around. If you were liking to sync your breathing with your steps, to have the exhale slightly longer than the inhale, so the 4 on the inhale and 5 on the exhale. But if you've then got 2 options to try to relieve the suffocation feeling a little bit, increasing tidal volume. So you could keep to the 5 and 4, but just switch them around. Increase your tidal volume. So you're going to have, for the 4-second inhale, try to activate that diaphragm we just felt before, and try to take a larger breath during those 4 steps for your inhale. Yeah. The volume you breathe during that time is dependent on like how quickly you're at, like the velocity it's coming in at. So your diaphragm strength, how much your rib cage can expand, all those things are trainable and changeable and can improve. So increase your tidal volume during that inhale. That may work. The other would be not slowing it down quite as much. So if you like syncing it with your steps, rather than let's continue with the switch. We've switched, so it's 4 steps on your inhale, 5 on your exhale. Well, let's change it to 3 on the inhale and 4 on the exhale. So it's not quite as slow. That might relieve that sense of like feeling too much out of breath. Because the body doesn't respond particularly well to being forced to do something that feels super uncomfortable. I've mentioned before, like my training background, coaching background comes from strength and conditioning. A bit like Goldilocks, not that she weight trained, but with weight training it's the same. You want to put the right amount of weight on the bar. Put too much on, you can barely move it, or you're going to get injured. Put too little on, you don't really get stronger. It's the same with this, like with training your breathing. If you make it too difficult, the adaptations, you're fighting against something. You want to be able to relax particularly with running. Most important thing is that you can relax. And you want to use your breathing to send positive feedback loops to the brain, like I'm in control, I'm relaxed, this is calm, this is going to get me into flow state. Yeah. Great question. I'm already an OA advanced instructor, recently qualified, but just love your stuff, David, and find it so helpful. Oh, Pamela, thank you very much. That's nice. That wasn't a question, but thank you. That's nice. I appreciate that a lot. Can we talk about breathwork during muscle training and increase muscle mass? You mentioned this on Instagram. Tina! So there's a little bit around hypoxic training. So this is something to just be a little careful on, like hypoxic training. The research on it is we get an increasing growth hormone naturally within the body when we combine hypoxic training with resistance training. Now, all the research on hypoxic training is done by manipulating with either a chamber or a mask the amount of oxygen someone's breathing in. The amount of oxygen in the air is about 20.9%. And then with the hypoxic training, they might change that and bring it down to like 16 or 17%, something like that. So there's less oxygen in every breath that someone's taking in. So the oxygen that's getting to the blood and the oxygen that's getting to the muscle is reduced. And that creates what we call hypoxic response, meaning like oxygen is low. We get a lot more metabolite, like the byproducts from physical exercise. So you're going to get an increase in lactate, and you're going to get an increase in CO2, you're going to increase in other waste products when you're training in hypoxia. And one of the responses from the body from that like challenge of working out in hypoxia with less available oxygen is an increase in growth hormone. So they see an increase in muscle mass when we do hypoxic training with strength training rather than just strength training on its own. Most people don't have a hypoxic machine to control the amount of oxygen you're breathing. And that's where, though, with breath holding, we can create a hypoxic response in the body. It's much shorter term, rather than you could do your whole hour-long workout in a hypoxic chamber, whereas every time you hold your breath hold might only last 10, 15 seconds or something. So it's small amounts of hypoxia, but that's the thing that I've been talking a little bit about with the 3-week breath holding course that I've ran a few times last year and the year before. That's one of the things that we cover in that. But essentially like breath holding whilst you're doing some resistance work. Not heavy max level stuff, more hypertrophy, meaning like rep ranges like 6 to 12 or like higher rep ranges. I'm interested in respiratory muscle training. Is this only diaphragm or other tools? Is there a lesson on this? So one of your, look, this is like a pizza, a blue pizza for those in the UK. Here's one I prepared earlier. So this is the mask that Patrick developed, the sports mask. That provides two things: resistance to your inhalation and your exhalation. You can use your nose or your mouth, but we would typically, you're going to do a lot better using your nose, interestingly, with this. But also, it's your exhalation goes obviously into the mouth, and then you rebreathe some of your exhaled air, and your exhalation is around 100 times higher in carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide in the air is like 0.04 or something. It's very low, whereas it could be 4 or 5% in your exhale. But the more exercise you're doing, the more CO2 you're creating, and the higher your tolerance of it, you're going to have more in your exhale. So that helps with respiratory muscle strength training as well as your CO2 tolerance. Whereas a lot of the other devices are like a mouthpiece, where it's only training your mouth breathing, which is fine for some sports and what people need sometimes, but it's only training that, and it's not doing anything for your CO2 levels, your CO2 tolerance, but it will be creating respiratory muscle strength. So respiratory muscles, diaphragm, intercostals are our main ones, and as well as strengthening those, I would also be looking at the mobility of those ribs and the rib cage itself. So not only do I want muscles that are stronger, I want them stronger being able to go through good range. Same as any muscle. Don't treat the respiratory muscles any different to any others necessarily. In that, like, if I want to train my bicep, if I train it in just a very shortened range all the time, I'm going to be very weak in this range, and I'm going to be at risk of like dislocating my elbow. If I only train the strength of my breathing muscles in a very restricted way, yes, they might get stronger, but if I can't mobilize them, I'm not going to be able to get that full capacity of the diaphragm I want, and it's going to restrict my ability to increase that important tidal volume we had on point 3. So I've got a whole series of like breathing mobilizations that some of you will have joined some of the courses I've taught that on, but stuff to get the ribs moving as well as strengthening the breathing muscles, I would be looking at. Does the mask help one to train hypoxia? So you very limited. So if you want to get a hypoxic response, you're going to need to hold. You're going to need to either control the amount of oxygen you're breathing, or with using this, you need to actually hold. We would hold the breath whilst using it. That's going to give you your respiratory muscle strength training when you do then breathe for your recovery, your CO2 tolerance, and your hypoxia response, so the lower oxygen. But breath holding with that combined is like something quite advanced that you would want to build up to over time. The mask is on Amazon worldwide or at oxygenvantage.com. Yeah. Cool beans. Thank you, Tessie. Van Burler. Cool names. People have some cool names. I don't know if people are making up. My name's really boring. But yeah, cool. Thank you for joining. I say I will send the replay. I'll have to upload it, but then I'll send the replay out on email once that's uploaded. I'll put the 2 links into the 2 free courses, and if anyone's interested in the last training of the year that I'm doing here in Snowdonia, I'll put the details in about that. Cool. Thank you all for joining. Hope it was helpful. And I'll see you soon. Diolch yn fawr. Oh, thanks, Dave. A thumbs up from Dave.